Hello, and welcome to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. My name is Faden, and I'm the founder of Cape Coffee Beans, South Africa's leading retailer in the specialty coffee space. We sell everything you need to make an amazing cup of coffee at home, at the office, in the cafe, or even on the road, including equipment, accessories, and artisan roasted coffee beans, both online and in store at our headquarters in Claremont, Cape Town. This podcast is a deep dive into the world of South African specialty coffee with a focus on the brands, the businesses, and the people in the local coffee scene, many of whom I'm privileged to work with. I'll be bringing you interviews with many of these South African coffee heroes, so please do subscribe to the podcast and share it with your coffee loving friends. Thank you for your support. Now let's get to today's episode. Before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to check in with those of you who have been listening regularly. We do seem to be receiving some positive feedback and some 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts specifically, which is great to see. I think that some people are enjoying getting to know our roasters a little bit better. I certainly have been enjoying getting to know their stories a little bit better, and I seem to have learned something new at least every episode. I also wanted to address one of the most common requests that we seem to be getting. A lot of people seem to be asking for more info about brewing, potentially some equipment and coffee reviews, I guess some more content specifically about the things that we sell. I just wanted to say that I do think we're going to get to that. The plan at the moment is to interview one of the founders or one of the owners of each one of the coffee businesses that we work with. I think that it's a good time right now during lockdown to go and do that with all of them, and many of them have already been recorded and will be published soon, only a couple left to do. Once we've done all that, my plan is definitely to branch out and do some slightly different content. And at that point, I think we can dive deep on some specific topics. We certainly can look at things like brewing. We can get more specific on some of the topics that I've spoken about with the roasters. So I would encourage you, if you have some specific preferences in terms of what we should do next, please do write in. Please leave a comment on social media and let us know. I definitely will take into consideration what people are asking for when we choose the next formats. Now, for today, this episode, like the previous one, is an interview with one of the owners of one of the roasting businesses that we work with. And in today's episode, I interview Warren Machanik, who's the founder and owner of Quaffee. This is a slightly longer episode. I hope you bear with us through the whole thing. It's quite an interesting insight into Warren's full background. And I think that one of the reasons that it's a bit longer is that despite the fact that Quaffee is not the oldest coffee business that we work with in terms of the business itself, Warren has been a passionate coffee consumer and a coffee hobbyist for a very long time, possibly longer than some of the other roasting businesses have been around. And that allows him to have certain particular perspectives around all of this. In truth, we even ran out a bit of time, and we may have to get back to Warren and go into a little bit more detail on things like roasting. But I think that this is a great start and really a good way to get to know Warren, the guy behind Quaffee, which I would say is probably one of the less known brands that we work with, but the quality of their coffee is absolutely incredible, and I am a big Quaffee fan, so I hope that this might inspire you to try Quaffee if you haven't yet. I definitely would encourage you to do that, and in the meantime, you can get to know Warren and Quaffee a little bit better. Now, on to the episode. Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Warren Machanik, the owner and founder of Quaffee. Warren and I have known each other for quite a long time. Warren was actually part of my personal early coffee journey. Warren, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
No problem, no problem. Well, Warren, I've learned a lot about coffee from you over the years. Back in the day, I don't know if you remember, it was actually Zane, who now works for More Flavor, who at the time worked at Union Hand Roasted, who introduced me to you. And obviously I came and chatted with you quite a bit and learned a lot about coffee from you. So it's great now to be able to share some of your wisdom with the people listening to this podcast. Before we get into all that coffee wisdom, though, I always like to start.
Shout out to Zane. He in some ways, Zane has been, even though he's been in and out, he's a very positive effect to the South African coffee market.
Absolutely. Zane's one of those guys that's that kind of, he's worked for a lot of different places. Everybody knows him. He's definitely been a connector in the industry. And yeah, I mean, he certainly was for me and for us. So shout out to Zane for sure. I hope he'll be listening. But before we get into the coffee stuff, I do like to start by asking people a little bit about their personal background. Not necessarily the whole thing, but it'd be interesting to hear about what were you doing before you got into the coffee industry.
Yeah, so I think for me, my life really started at varsity. Um, I had a very frustrating time at school. I don't really think I'm very a good sausage with a sausage machine. So really started at varsity, and it'll actually link back to coffee as well. So varsity was where I discovered my one of my passions, which was computers, and I have a tendency to jump hook, line, and sinker into everything that I do. So I literally, from the day I started working with computers, I became obsessed with them. So this is very long ago, in the early 80s, when people looked at PCs as if they were some joke of a device. And in fact, while I was at varsity, I was actually told to stop playing with PCs because I wouldn't get a job. I was quite passionate about what PCs could do, and I've really felt it would individualize computer power. And so that's where I started. I started with computers, and linked to that was also I started. I had to pay my way through university, and I had a job selling hi-fi, which sounds quite irrelevant today, but there were a lot of lessons I learned selling hi-fi that I think apply to almost everything um, today. Uh, and we can get into them, but the main thing I learned was how price and performance are quite linked. So what you spend is what you get, and there is a diminishing return of the money that you spend to what you get, but there's by spending a little bit more, you can often get way better than what you would get for uh, by spending nothing. As in Afrikaans, they say, "Goed koop is duur koop," and is one of the lessons I learned. From there, I went into I worked in one of the first projects that was trying to put a graphical user interface to the front end of a mainframe. It was 8990. I then ended up being offered a job in an engineering company, writing as their first computer science programmer. I was employee number 19. And when I left 5 years later, the company was about 80 strong. And what I did then was we were writing low-level code for man-machine interfaces or SCADA systems. Was a phenomenal job. I still think it's one of the best jobs I ever had. Just the problem was the people. Engineers are this particular brand of people that can sometimes get my goat. So there, and then I started my own business, IT business in 1995, which I ran for about 2 years. And then I merged with another company to create a more holistic IT business, which then spawned another business in 99. And basically, I'd spent most of my 20s and my 30s building my career with my wife to be, because she wasn't really my wife. We only got married to have kids. And the two businesses that we created became quite big. So around about 2002, 2003, the businesses were, the IT business was about 120 strong, and the business that we had spawned was privatized ATMs. So from there, in 2002, there was a lot of things that were happening in my life, but one of the things is I got married. And the main reason I got married was to have children. I was 38 at the time, and we decided that it was time to have kids because we basically spent our whole life building a career. And that's sort of where my life started changing dramatically. While my wife was pregnant with our first kid, she's older than me, so she was 40. I had a whole lot of life realizations about my current career choice. You know, when you don't have kids and you don't really have commitments, working every weekend, 24/7, all the time was part of my life. That's how I worked. I worked all the time. I worked. I lived to work. I loved my job. It had its stresses, and a lot of the stresses were normally human related. But in 2004, when my daughter was born, I more or less took a lot of stock. A lot of things happened to me that really made me sit up and listen to what was going on. I had become extremely unhealthy, and I was given a choice by a very good doctor. I was very lucky, where he basically said, change your life or die. That's what he said. You're going to shorten your lifespan dramatically unless you do something. And so I decided to change my life. And one of the things I decided to do was get out of the IT industry, which at that point was becoming quite aggressively competitive and was more commoditized than before. And without having any plans, I quit in 2000, and I sold my shares. I gave my partners in the business notice, and I said that either they can find somebody to buy me out, or or they can buy me out. And that all rolled down about 18 months after my daughter was born. And I had no plans of what I was going to do. I just knew that I had to get out. My wife, Meryl, is Cape Townian. She hated Joburg. We had a branch in Cape Town, which I was running, but I was mainly spending a lot of time in Joburg. And she had more or less decided that she wanted to move back to Cape Town. We had actually spent quite a lot of time commuting, about 3.5 years that she had spent before she fell pregnant, where she was in Cape Town, I was in Joburg, and I would fly down and I would spend weekends with her, and she would fly up and spend weekends with us. We cat people, so the cats were traveling with us every three months. And I basically quit. I decided I was going to take a sabbatical, and my partners were quite upset about me leaving, and I had to sign a restraint of trade. And that's more or less brings us up to 2005, 2006, which is where I arrived in Cape Town with no real plan on what I was going to do. I actually assumed that I would go back into IT. I thought I would take a short time out. But the funny thing about stopping to work when you've been working all your life is it's actually not that easy. And I struggled, to be totally honest. After 3 months of doing nothing, I was already planning on doing things. I was helping other people set businesses up. I got involved with the Investec entrepreneurial program in Philippines. I wanted to get my hands dirty again. And that is, at that point was when I ended up meeting Lucien from the coffee roasting company. But it's quite a long story about why I read in. I know you wanted to ask about how I got into coffee. So maybe we can basically take a step back at this point, because this is where the two timelines merge.
Sure. Yeah. So were you already into coffee at that point?
Okay, coffee had always been a passion for me. I can't actually remember when I started liking coffee. I just remember that I'd been asking my dad, I really wanted to drink coffee, and he told me basically, until you're 12, you can't drink coffee. And my dad was probably way ahead of his time. I mean, he had a hand grinder when I was a kid, and we used to do this thing on Sundays where we would have breakfast as a family, and he would make a pot of coffee. And it was my job to grind the coffee. And as soon as I was 12, I was allowed to have coffee. And from then on, I'd say my love affair with coffee was initially linked to my dad. My dad and I did a lot of playing with different coffees. I remember the one holiday, my Christmas gift to him was 8 different types of coffee. And we went on holiday, and it sounds really weird now because this is very early 80s, 81, 82. My father had a Melita drip pour over. We call it pour over there, but we just called it a manual drip then. And we went through all the coffees. That's what we did on the holidays. Every morning we tried a different coffee. We tried it. I was always, so because I'd always grown up with fresh ground coffee, I had a bit of a coffee culture without realizing it. When I went to varsity, I spent time with my mom and dad, but then my dad and mom immigrated to America for a while. and I stayed at Varsity. So I then left home, and I took with me a mocha pot and a grinder, and I became known as the coffee guy at university, to the point that I met my friend one of my friends at Varsity was a mathematician, and he didn't drink coffee, and I was shocked that he didn't drink coffee. I was like, "How can you drink coffee? You've got to drink coffee." And 6 months later, he had convinced his mom to buy an espresso machine and a grinder that he had in res. So we were making espressos and in bits res, 86, 87. So we were always into it. And in fact, I remember there was a little bit of an Italian espresso culture in Hillbrow at the time. And it took us I did a lot of walking at Varsity. He and I were both runners, so we were quite fit. And we used to run into Hillbrow, have an espresso or two, and then run back, and we'd carry on working. He was doing mathematics, and I was doing computer science, and we used to spend lots. To be open honest, I'm a self-confessed nerd, and I loved Varsity. Varsity was my way of doing what I loved doing, which was researching and doing things that I liked doing. I spent a lot of time in the libraries, a lot of time in the labs. And espresso was basically, we were drinking it because it was sort of a newish culture in Hillbrow in those days, but mainly driven by Italians. And so I was always drinking coffee. I think the next big step that happened to me about coffee was right about 96, 97, just after I'd started my first business. One of my new clients was a import-export guy. He was an Italian guy, and I got to know him pretty well, and I used to go fix his computer. I had a lot of DOS skill because I grew up in PCs. So a lot of these DOS-based programs in 95, 96, 97 were giving a lot of trouble. So I got a bit of a reputation for being able to fix these things. Anyway, I went to go visit the guy, and he then said to me, "Would you like a coffee?" So I said, "Yes, I'd love a coffee." And he gave me this coffee, and it was an espresso made out of a mocha pot. So immediately he and I start talking. And guess what he does? I mean, this is in the middle of the 90s. He is an import-exporter, and one of the things he's importing is green bean from Ethiopia, which his mom, who's a real Italian mama, roasts on the stove in the office. And they got to know me so well that they would hear I was coming. The mama used to roast the coffee in the morning so that I could have my coffee when I came. And I would get my mocha pot and my cup, and they would give me and they thought it was hysterical that I didn't add sugar into my coffee. They just thought I was very strange. So, and that was the first time I'd heard of a thing like Arabica. I'd never even known that there was such a thing as Arabica. And it was quite fascinating talking to these people because of the fact that, in South Africa, we tend to be a bit isolated because of our past. And to meet these people who are literally bringing coffee and roasting. And at the time, I don't think I really understood why it was so unique. It was just something that these mad Italians did, and I got on well with them. There was those sort of things that happened, and there was also an Italian law firm I worked with who had a Lavazza pod machine that was also pure Arabica. And I would arrive to fix their computers, and it was like before I even sat at the computer, there was my espresso. I was drinking my espresso, and then I was allowed to work on the computers. They loved the fact that I drank espresso. And I think that that translated to eventually when I went to Italy. Meryl and I went to Italy, and on the way back, I realized the coffee that I had in Italy was some of the best I've had in my life. And I actually emptied my case so that there was one of these double-sided cases. The one side was just full of coffee. So I actually brought in loads of coffee from Italy. So this was probably 99, and I brought the coffee in, and at that stage, I then started really getting serious about espresso and espresso extraction. So I bought my first. I had they make a Breville version of it now, but Kenwood had a grinder inbuilt grinder to espresso machine at the time, which I bought, and I actually took it to office. And I also bought a very early bean to cup machine for convenience. So this is what my setup was at home, and this is in 19 and at work. So at work, I had a desk just for my espresso machine, and I only drank espresso. And I drank if I went out on the road, I would stop at a place like a Seattle and get a cappuccino because I couldn't drink other people's coffee. I didn't like other people's coffee prepared. So coffee was a very personal journey for me. And in fact, I see coffee shops, at that time I still saw coffee shops. I'd go there, try the coffee. If I liked it, I'd buy the coffee beans. So that was my way to buy coffee beans because it was not possible to buy coffee beans. And then around about 2002, I meet Joe's wife, and I can't remember her name. Now, Joe was probably the very first specialty roaster in South Africa that I'm aware of. Nobody really knows much about him except for the few. But he ran a company called eCoffee, and he was a professor of one of the bio things, and he was flying to Ethiopia, giving lectures, and then he would bring beans back with him, and he would roast them. That was the first time I ever saw a Deirdre. Was in 2003. He was roasting on a 3 kg Deirdre, and I met his wife, and I started buying fresh roasted coffee from him. And that's when I first discovered Yoga Schiff and Limu and Hurrah and all that stuff. And I basically became an extremely loyal supporter of theirs. And that's also got me interested in home roasting. So in the meantime, as I said, this is why these two things dovetail. So in 2004, when my daughter was born, one of the things I go on this extremely strict diet, and I was given 19 things I was allowed to eat, and one of them wasn't coffee. I had to go off coffee permanently. That's what they wanted me to do. And I remember after 4 months, the doctor would see me once a month, and the nutritionist would see me every week, and she would check my blood because I had a blood sugar of 33
Wow.
That's how sick I was. And so she was taking my blood and she was making sure. I'm actually extremely lucky to have met the people I met who basically didn't force me to become an insulin dependent diabetic. And after 4 months, I'd been doing a lot of research myself. I paid my subscription of $30 to be part of the Harvard Medical Journal, and I started reading a lot about what's actually going on in my body. And one of the things I couldn't find was proper proof about why coffee was bad for me. So I actually said to her, I said, Sally I was going to, she's actually got a PhD in nutrition. And I said to her, Sally, I cannot find any medical proof about coffee being bad for you. I can find a lot of associated proof, but I can't find any proper studies. So I would like to start drinking coffee. I've given up my pizza. I've given up my croissant. I've given up my hamburgers. I've given up all the things that were my vices. But really, coffee I have to have. It's the one thing I have to have. I'd rather die 10 years younger than not drink coffee. So she said to me, fine, I'm testing you every week. So let's see how it goes. And so I started drinking coffee again. And what happened is actually my blood sugars became better, not worse.
And I suppose we now know that coffee actually improves insulin sensitivity, right? So I guess that's not surprising, but maybe it was at that time.
Exactly. And that's sort of what happened. It was like all these weird things were starting to come out about the positive things about coffee. And so she monitored me, and I was on this diet, for 18 months. I was slowly but surely introducing things into my diet. But what was more interesting for me, because of reading a lot, I started realizing a lot of our food. I mean, this has got nothing to do with coffee, but a lot of what we eat, it's bad because of the process it goes through. So I got to the point where she would allow me to make my own pizza, but I had to make my own dough, make my own tomatoes, make my own, get an organic or manually made mozzarella, which my sister actually at the time was making cheese, so that worked well for me. So I got back into these foods on a very healthy level. So I was eating them properly because they were made properly. And that sort of also back dovetails to the coffee thing. So by 2005, I'm moving down to Cape Town, and now I'm looking for green bean. So I get on the internet. I'm looking on the internet. The only thing I can really find is Sweet Maria's. You must understand in those days there was literally nothing available. I got onto Amazon. I bought the only two books that were available on Amazon. One was the Kenneth David's book, and the other one was a book about home roasting. I can't remember who wrote that. But those are the only two books available on Amazon. 2004, 2005. I can't remember when I ordered them. I order them. I get them. I start reading about home roasting. And I started messing with home roasting. I then needed to get green bean. So I had got some from Joe in Joburg, but in Cape Town I was struggling. So I was at one stage entertaining on bringing in coffee from Sweet Maria's. And so while I'm Googling Yuga Chef, which was my favorite green at the time, I discovered this company called Coffee Roasting Company, which had just started in Lawrenceford. I had gone to a couple of the newer coffee shops that were open in Cape Town to try their coffees, but I wasn't really that impressed with what I tasted. Maybe I was just a little bit unfortunate on the day, but I don't want to name any of them, but some of them are very well-known coffee shops, and some of them I went to, and I was like, really, this coffee shop, a lot of people talk about it, it's not that great. So I felt for me that I hadn't really got anything to scratch the itch. And then I went to meet Lucien. So we're back to meeting Lucien. Now, those people who met Lucien, unfortunately, Lucien passed away in 2011, which we'll come back to later. Those people who met Lucien will probably admit that he was probably one of the nicest guys in coffee at the time. He had no qualms with anybody, just spending time with him. He would answer all his questions. If you wanted to spend the day roasting, he would let you play with his roaster. He guided me through my early roasts. I bought green from him. I bought roasters from him. I started playing at home. I tried originally to try to roast in an oven. It didn't work. It's very difficult. You bake your coffees. I then started popcorn. I actually bought a special large popcorn popper because the problem with normal popcorn roasting is you can only roast 90 grams. At this point, I was drinking quite a lot of coffee. It was sort of my only vice. So I had a Brasilia espresso machine at this point with a ditting grinder. And I was drinking, I had to try, I was trying to remember this, but I was probably drinking about a kilogram of coffee a week. And I think it's because of espresso itself. It's not really a fully satisfying drink because it's so small. So I think the liquid content's too little. And we'll come back to that later. But espresso was a love for me, but I was drinking slightly longer. So in a 1-4 extraction coffee to try and get more liquid. But I was going through a lot of coffee. So roasting 90 grams on a popcorn popper was not really getting me through much. And so that's why I spent a lot more time with Lucien. So it became a routine that I would drive through on Tuesday, spend some time with Lucien, maybe roast my coffee. He and I would have had discussions about roasting. And then I would actually normally work there serving coffees. I wasn't the milk person, I never have been. So if people came in and they wanted coffee, I would make them coffee. He was doing quite a lot of coffees at the time. And then he and I started talking, and he's a fascinating guy, was a fascinating guy, super intelligent. And his background had been similar to me. It got to the point where he had reached sort of like a pinnacle of his career, and he had left to start something new. And a side project was coffee. And so one day while I'm driving back, I think to myself, maybe I should think about doing this coffee thing. I mean, this fresh roasted high-end coffee is definitely a new thing in Cape Town. And I felt that there were three major gaps in the market at the time. I felt, firstly, that it was very hard to find green coffee. That was the first gap. And I didn't think there was a massive demand for it, but it would grow. The other thing I felt is there were other people like me. I'd met them that loved coffee and drank probably too much of it on a weekly basis, and normally had a set up at home that was better than most cafes. And those people, I wanted to look at doing something on a reoccurring basis. So basically, delivering coffee fresh on a 2 week to 3 week basis, where they're always having coffee fresh roasted at their door. And the third thing, which is really where I felt there was a bigger gap, was the small to medium sized business that wants to be able to serve a good coffee to their clients. And that's when I got involved in the bean to cup thing. I basically then spent 3 months researching bean to cup. I went to go visit all the large guys who were really sort of bringing in bean to cups. I had a chat to a couple of them. Most of them thought I was mad. They thought there's no ways people are going to put bean to cups in their offices. So coming from IT, the way our IT business work is we never sold an HP server with Microsoft Windows, with Microsoft Exchange. We sold people an email server, whether it ran Linux or Windows, whatever, they didn't care. They wanted an email server that did this. And that was sort of my approach to the bean to cup thing, is not to sell bean to cups, is to sell coffee solutions to small businesses. And so I used some of my capital that I had from selling the business to basically create a finance model around bean to cup machines, just to see how it would go as an interesting thing.
And I think it's worth pausing there just to highlight something that the listeners may want to remark on, is that there are two things very conspicuously missing from that, or not missing, but different from other coffee businesses, and I think from everybody else that we've spoken to, is that you were neither trying to start a cafe, nor were you trying to start a wholesale business that sold to cafes.
Yeah, and I think that's because I don't see myself. I don't really understand wholesale, and personally, my personal experience with the cafe business was not positive. So I didn't see a. If I look back at the other people and what they did, they saw problems that they could fix. I just saw a problem. I didn't see a way to fix it because I didn't have the experience in it. And I'm not really a forward-facing person, so I didn't really see what the problem, how to fix the cafe model. Where I think Dave and Joel and all the other guys who will interview would have seen a reason to fix it.
Yeah.
And actually, this is where Lucian and I were very similar. He and I did not understand the wholesale model or the cafe market. It was something that we had to learn, and we didn't know it at all. But to me, coffee was about enjoying coffee yourself. It was always about brewing it yourself.
So you built a business. You built a business very much focused around home consumer and office drinkers of coffee, right?
Basically, around demands that I understood. It was so frustrating for me when I had my espresso machine at work that I'd run out of beans, and to try to find beans was virtually impossible. I would sometimes walk into a coffee shop and say, "Please, can you send me a kilogram of beans?" Yeah, but we've got stock. It's our stock. And I said, "Look, just." I was paying. I remember at the one coffee shop they had some coffee that I liked. I was paying 480 rand a kilogram, and this is in 2001, 2002.
Oh wow!
That's what I was paying. That's the only way I could get beans. I couldn't get beans any other way. And that was the only way I could have what I wanted. And that's more or less what I sat down. So initially I started as an interesting. So I started doing the bean to cup machines and then selling to a few home users that I knew, people I'd got to know. And literally within 3 months, we had 30 clients. about 20 of them were running bean to cups and 10 of them were domestic. And that's when I went and approached a software company, because even though my background was programming, I thought, let me get this done professionally. And I was going to get the system written that could look at prediction. So we would predict when people ran out of coffee, and they would send in emails, and that was the idea. And I spent literally 4 months trying to convince somebody to write this for me. And one day I just sat down, me and my wife sat down, and we just hacked it out in Access, and we got something working. It was supposed to be temporary, but it basically is still our back end. It's quite scary because it's just worked. We've just built on it. One of the things I'm trying to do is move that across. And basically what I did is I tried to create a fresh subscription model. So not a subscription model that people are forced to buy, a subscription model that people can say, I want to buy 250 or 500 or a kilogram or whatever I want to buy. And when that 250 or 500 a kilogram or 2 kilograms is run out, then I want more, but I want to do it within my time period. So we typically were delivering, some customers were once a week, some customers were once every 2 weeks, some customers once every 3 weeks. So that was our normal cycle. And then every now and then they would say, well, we don't want this week. And then we would postpone the email to the next week. So the whole system for the home user was to do this direct email system, because I realized that you cannot stop somebody walking down an aisle in a supermarket and picking up the coffee and putting it in their trolley. Yes, it was all ground then, but I felt that with the bean to cup and with a little bit of, for the high-end home user who was normally had a grinder at home, but that was very seldom, because grinders in these days, what people call the coffee grinder was a spice grinder. You couldn't really find a burr grinder. There was one burr grinder on the market at the time for domestic use, the Krapps. I don't know if you know the Krapps or Bosch. They were basically the same make. That was the only burr grinder on the market at the time. There was no hand grinders. I mean, the market's got so many grinders now. So the idea was to try and stop the consumer buying. And I only sold beans in the beginning. So the idea was to try and stop that purchase in the supermarket. And that's sort of how I got into it. I basically found that the business started taking off, and we ran this predictive model. And slowly but surely, we got into this, and that's how Quaffee started. And Quaffee basically was, I love certain words. Quaff means to drink, is enthusiasm, but quaff and quality coffee, and also the Afrikaans coffee sounds a bit like coffee, and I quite liked that name. And then I decided if I was going to do coffee, I must have a reason why I do it. And I was sitting down drawing and thinking about how I'd get into it. And my daughter had just turned 2, and I was drawing on a piece of paper, and I drew a coffee bean. And if you draw a coffee bean vertically, it looks a bit like a part of a female's body. So I turned it on its side, and I drew eyes on it. And my daughter came and asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm just drawing. And she said to me, frog. And I sat there and I thought, this is quite fascinating for me, because I never wanted to do what we did in IT, where we were chasing the buck. If I was going to start a new business, it must have a reason why I was starting it besides product. And I thought her coming onto my lap was sort of a sign for me to say, let's create a business that I'm proud of. A business that if she's 20 and she wants to work at, she'll be proud of the fact that it's there. It represents good values. It's representing environmental sustainability. It's representing ethics. And that's sort of what the frog started representing to me. I felt that I wanted to almost have a mascot, which eventually we did get. It reminded me on a day-to-day basis on why I had got into the business. And it was sort of my cornerstone. That's why a lot of people ask about the frog, but the frog actually is the first stone we laid in the foundation of Quaffee, because it represents so many things to me. The future represents sustainability, it represents basically one person's vision on trying to get a really good cup of coffee at home. And in fact, we even wrote a story about this, which we had on our old website. And I did actually put it into a book form at one stage. And that's what was the core and how we started. And so we started the business like that. It was originally only going to be me. I was going to basically spend time at the roastery, roast coffee with Lucian, distribute it on a Wednesday. So the idea was to go there, roast on Tuesday, distribute on Wednesday. And eventually I was having to place the orders on the Monday afternoon so that Lucian could start the roasting early on the Tuesdays. So by the time I got there, most of it was done, so I could finish packing and helping him. I mean, he and I were both running our businesses by ourselves. He and I both had pretty negative experiences about hiring people, so we weren't that keen to hire people at that point. And his company started doing well, and ours started doing well, and we broke into a very small niche market at the time. And I don't know if I should stop there, but the progress that happened after that then ended up molding our business. Lucian and I got on really, really well. He was sort of basically, I had a very good friend in Cape Town who I'd gone to school with. He was living in Cape Town, but he was sort of my best friend at the time. We spent we saw each other at least weekly, and sometimes more often than that. He got me involved in some other things which we won't deal with, which on the IT side and the game farm and stuff, which was awesome because our lives became quite intermingled. He had kids that were roughly the same age as mine. By that stage, I'd had a second child. By 2007, my second daughter was born, and so he had kids that were like around us. He had a young kid, and I had a young kid. And there were so many things that seemed to work for us as people, and we spent a lot of time together. We got on really well, and we actually spoke about merging the two businesses at one stage. And I remember we had this discussion, and I went home, and I remember thinking to myself, I really don't want to merge. I haven't got a positive experience with having partners. I'm not saying, looking back now, I think having partners is good for me. But in those days, I was quite burnt with what had happened with the setting out. And we met for lunch, and I was going to tell him, look, I really don't want to merge. That's what I was going to tell him. And we met for lunch, and he sat down and he said, I really don't want to have a partner. I want to run my business separately. But what I really think is a good idea is if we set up a buy-sell agreement. You agree to buy from me, I agree to sell to you. And then we set up a buy-sell agreement that's just like a partnership agreement. And it actually worked out quite well. So I'm jumping ahead, but in 2008, when we met a guy called Morne, who started a company called Umami, and he brought in the AeroPress and the iRoast and ended up bringing in Caravella, which was Vermex at the time. That sort of buy-sell worked perfectly because if I wanted to buy green, I would buy green, sell it to him to roast, and he would sell it back to me as roasted. So there was never an argument about who did what and where's the money, and it became very, very simple. It was a simple invoice in, invoice out system. It was such a great partnership because we were never interested in meddling each other's businesses, but we were very interested in giving each other advice. So it became like the best of both worlds for us.
So you built the Quaffee brand around that and focused, as you were saying, on the home consumer and office space and so. But I take it at that point you were still roasting with Lucian. You hadn't set up your own roastery yet. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was more fascinated by the green. That was really what my fascination was. So Lucian was not that interested in green. He was interested, but he wasn't interested in learning how to cup, all those sort of things. So I had, by that stage, I'd actually imported an iRoast, and I was doing what today is called assessment of coffees. So I would assess the green, I would drink the green, cup it myself. I taught myself to cup it, which isn't difficult because you just go onto the Specialty Coffee Association website and download or it was Specialty Coffee Association of America in those days. And I downloaded the guidelines. I'd read a lot of books. A lot of the books had covered cupping. And I was fascinated by the process of sourcing coffee. That's actually what my fascination. He hated it. He just wanted to roast coffee. So it was almost like I was perfect at the beginning and perfect at the end, and he was happy to do the middle. I found roasting was interesting for me, but it is, I think, with Lucien, it became very mechanical for me because he had this mechanical way of roasting, which I thought was the way you roasted. I learned later on that it's not the way you roast. So this is what extremely synergetic for us. All the stuff he didn't want to do, I loved doing. And so if we got coffees from the local guys, I would be the quality control. I would basically say, I don't like this coffee, I do like this coffee. And he worked with me. And if he liked a coffee that I didn't like, he would sell it and I wouldn't. So that was basically how it worked. So we weren't roasting ourselves.
And so at that time, you had that partnership with Lucien. Obviously, you mentioned that Lucien passed away quite a few years ago. Maybe we can fast forward a little bit to the present day and how has Quaffee changed since then? How has the business evolved?
So that's actually where I was going to go. So in 2008, Mornay was actually a significant impression for me. Mornay had spent. He was a SAP consultant, and he was a regular client at the coffee roasting company. We started talking to each other. Every time I went there, Lucy would introduce him. We started getting on well, and he had an idea to become a Q grader. So this is in 2007, 2006 is when we met, when he was doing it, and I met him in 2008. And he had spent 10 years in Colombia with a SAP rollout, and he got interested in coffee, and he became very good friends with two people called Giancarlo and Alessandro, who were setting up a company called Vermax. And basically in 2008, he convinced them to fly here and let us taste coffee. And this is where my real coffee journey starts for me. And that's when I really tasted specialty coffee, because this is what the guys were doing. They brought in a number of coffees, about 7 different Colombian coffees. And the first coffee that I tasted that I absolutely could not believe how awesome it was Los Itoras. So Lucy and I took a huge gamble, and we imported a container of coffee from these guys. And that's sort of when things really started changing for me. I mean, the word specialty is bandied around a lot, but I think until you've tasted your first specialty coffee, it's very difficult to understand why it's so important, because it really is dramatically different to what you're normally drinking in a cup. And yes, there were other people doing specialty at the time in Cape Town. For me, it wasn't something that the coffees I drank hadn't wowed me yet. But now it was because I was doing my own roasting and my own little eye roast, and we were trying to get things done. I remember sitting with Warren at the back of the roastery and showing him how to use an eye roast, because he'd never seen one before. And he actually had the agency for eye roast in South Africa as well. So that's sort of what starts with Mornay. And in 2008, there's another thing that happens in 2008, and that is the first South African barista comp. So we actually, at that stage, I was still quite interested in what's going on. So actually, we sponsored the first barista comp in 2008. It was my first toe in the water of looking at what was going on the other side of the fence. And to be totally honest, I got quite badly burnt. I was not happy with the way the event ran. I'm not going to mention any names, but other coffee companies who hadn't sponsored the event got a lot more press out of it than me. And that was sort of I stepped back from doing anything to do with marketing. I just felt I don't really want to sit there seeing who's got the largest voice in coffee. I want to do what I do because it's what I love. And so from 2008 to 2011, when Lucien passed away, in between, Lucien got divorced, and his coffee business changed dramatically. He then started becoming more obsessed with how much money we were going to make out of the coffees, rather than how good the coffees were. So he and I were starting to part ways at the time. Unfortunately, he died, and I was already looking around at what I was doing. So just before Lucien died, um, I I started looking around at other people to do some contract roasting because I was sourcing some coffees that I wanted to roast. Lucien didn't like them because they were too expensive. So there were a couple of people that approached me to bring coffee, who had brought coffees in. And I then actually contacted a couple of people who actually were quite generous. So at that stage, a couple of the other guys started up and we approached a few. And eventually I approached Legato, who had just started in 2009, I think, or 2009, 2010. And I said to them, look, I need some contract roasting. I'm looking at going to probably bring my own roaster in. And I had this Kenyan that I wanted to roast. And they started roasting Kenyan for me as a extra offering into our coffees. And that's sort of when the ball sort of started rolling. Lucien actually, about a month before he died, sat me down and said, I appreciate that at that point, the part of our business, our business through him was, he was about 40 to 50% of his business. And he said, I can see what's going on here. You're obviously looking at maybe doing your own thing. So actually, I wasn't that interested, but the fact that he was having so many personal issues was actually beginning to affect. I mean, I felt for him. I was there for him, but I had to make a change. And so I think what happened is his death actually forced me to make the decision, and we then took the decision I wanted to roast at Bacon for Wachten. I'd always been interested in going there. I had a casual discussion with a few people before. But in 2011 is when I went hell for leather to try and move there. At the same time, we had a chat to Deirdre, and we ordered a 12 kg roaster from them and a 2.5 kg. My original idea was to have the 2.5 kg to do organic and decaf coffees, and 12 kg to do the other coffees. I didn't have a place to put it. And I literally ordered it and then basically spent time securing the contract roasting with Legato. Our second shipment of Colombians was on the ship on the sea, and Lucien then died. So what we had done with all the AeroPress and with the coffee before, we'd split the bill 50-50. So he would order the AeroPresses, I would pay 50, he would pay 50, I'd get 50% of stock, he'd get 50% of stock, or he would sell it and we would get 50%. So that was part of the agreement that we had with this buy-sell thing. And so I was basically left, our shipment of AeroPresses was on the sea, our new green bean was on the sea, and Lucien basically, the day before we were going to discuss how we were going to pay for it, he died. Okay. And it sort of left me in a lurch, but I had to make a decision at that point. I was put under a lot of pressure by the state and also by his current partner to maybe merge with them again, which I'd not been interested in the first place. So I actually took a decision, and it was actually quite difficult because there was quite a lot going on in my life. And luckily, our relationship with Legato had grown. And it was a week before our second shipment of Colombians arrived. And I was actually away at the time for Christmas. And Rayhot and Andrew just stepped in, and I got the shipment delivered to them. They unpacked it, they put it in their roastery. I mean, they were phenomenal. They really were. And at the same time, we were now trying to figure out what to do. So to me, the success of Quaffee is linked to our staff. So that we had grown to the point where we needed a driver, and I'd hired a guy called Mzikizi to drive for us. And he had shown a lot of aptitude in figuring out the bean to cup machines. He was fixing them on the road. And I thought to myself, this is an opportunity for me to do something. Going back to the frog, I'm going to basically do upliftment and sustainability. I want to try and give back. So I decided I would take him off the road and we would go to Deirdre and learn how to roast properly. Not the way we had learned basically by parrot fashion, which is where we were roasting. And we took commitment to go to America, go visit Deirdre, go see the farm, the factory, go spend. They had a week course on roasting, and we did that. Poor Mzikizi had to get on a plane for the first time in his life and fly for 36 hours to the other end of the world. His family thought that they would never see him again, and we basically spent 36 hours in transit and then had to drive 2 hours to where Deirdre came, and we went on the Deirdre course. And at this stage, I had already more or less started deciding I don't really want to do any of the commodity grade coffees anymore, because I just was struggling to do quality control on them. And so we went on the course, and Mzikizi did so well on the course. You've heard the story before, but he actually was offered a job while he was there. The guy who was doing the training was Stephen himself, and he came up to me and said, "This guy gets it. He really gets it." And we spent a week there, and then we spent another week in Seattle, basically going around to see all the different shops that are world famous, including David Sherman's shop, which we actually didn't have coffee in because the coffee is very, very dark roasted, and I couldn't even get to the door. We walked into the door, and both he and I looked at each other and turned around and walked out, which is a funny story. Yeah.
So fast forwarding to the present day, I mean, I think that you've mentioned a lot of things that actually form part of what Quaffee is today, right? So you're still roasting at Bait and Verwachting on the wine farm, for those who don't know it. And you know, Mzikizi is still your roaster and does a phenomenal job. And you're still using those same Diedrich roasters that you talked about, right? And I suppose that your business model is still largely the same as what you intended, right? For the most part, you are serving home consumers and people in offices, though there might be a little bit more variety in there in terms of customer base now.
So because I started getting obsessed about high-end coffee, I think I've got to stick up my hand and say we lost a lot of our office clients. I wasn't offering a good value for money coffees anymore, although we still do have one. We had one on our list. I have gone back and revisited that. In fact, I think you and I had this discussion, but we've started doing a slightly darker roasted coffee for these bean to cups because the bean to cup machines just don't really do the specialty coffee justice. So that's what's changed. What's also changed for me is the relationships that we originally had with Vermex and Alcaravella. Those I spent a lot of time looking for other relationships in my life, which is basically probably going to link to what we discussed later about the green sourcing. But those were very important steps that were made in those years. And I was starting to try only do really good coffees. And what amazed me was how many really good coffees there are out in the world, which also bit me in the foot a bit. Before I met you, I think we were doing 30 something coffees. I was totally out of control. I had to cut it down. So we have now though we still do a lot of coffees. We've got a far more simpler model than I had before. I mean, we were actually at one stage I was doing 6-7 coffees from Central and South America. I was doing 6 coffees from Africa, maybe 8 coffees. I was trying to do 2 Asian coffees. I was totally. We didn't have enough space.
To be fair, I would say, among the roasters that Cape Coffee Beans works with, you still have the biggest variety concurrently, including 5 or 6 Colombian coffees at a time, right?
Well, the Colombian coffees, I think, is a bit of a passion project for me. So, Colombia and Ethiopia, I really think are countries that have to be. They're so multifactorial in coffee that I that to me is why I feel they're very important to have. I could probably cut the Colombians down to 3, but I have stories around each of the Colombians we do that I really love. So it's difficult for me. You can see I'm emotionally connected.
Sure. Well, and that probably segues nicely into chatting a little bit about, your particular approach to sourcing, because I think that that's also a little bit different, and maybe the ultimate illustration of that is the relationships you've built around the Colombian coffees.
Yeah, so I think it all started when I started really understanding exactly how coffee worked in the late 2009, 2008. So I spent a lot of time with Mornay, and Mornay actually is no longer involved in coffee. He now he actually lives in New Zealand. He went to Singapore and New Zealand. He became a Mormon, and Mormons can't drink coffee. So his passion for the sourcing, I was quite obsessed originally in 2008. In fact, we almost became fair trade certified in 2008. I thought that was the way to go. But then I started becoming a bit dubious about things around those models. So my personal approach started really with my eyes really opened with Vermax. And I realized that this is actually far better for both the coffee industry, the coffee consumer, and me, the roaster. So my original aim was to try and look at working on crop cycled coffees, because I felt that if we could, the problem with specialty coffee is that those people who love to always buy the same coffee can't. They want to buy, a Rwandan Vugi, but it's only available while you have the coffee in stock, and then it goes. And I found that there was a certain sector in the market that didn't like that. So I started looking at trying to predict on how much coffee we needed in a year. And that linked to the crop to crop model for me. I haven't got it right. I'll be totally honest. There's lots of origins that I don't get it right. I've had a lot of frustrations with some of the origins. The one that we've got it right is through Caravella, or what was Vermax, where we work on 2 and 3 cycles a year. Why 2 and 3 is Colombia does 2 pickings a year, but they do also pick the whole year round. So they have a major crop and a minor crop, or a fly crop, as they call it. So that was the perfect origin for us to get that right. So we got that right pretty quickly, actually. 2012 was the last time I ordered coffee without predicting what I was going to need in that year. So since then, I use forward prediction models where we look at how much coffee we'll need, and we actually book coffee of a particular quality through Caravella 6 to 8 months in advance. So the coffee is basically booked before they even do quality control. And what they do is then they allocate those people who've done that, they get an allocation. So in bad years where the crop isn't as good as the year before, they will split the allocation differently, and that's why sometimes we lose the Colombians. So on good years, we'll say we want this much, and they'll put it into the pie, and they say, fine, we can give you that, and the rest goes into their spot coffees, which they sell like everybody else. But what's important to me is this is a very long-term relationship where there's only one person between us and the grower, and that's where Caravella are quite remarkable. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they are quite amazing in what they do. They empower from the farms. They take the kids from the farms and teach them to do quality control. Their model is phenomenal. If anybody's interested in coffee, you should try to look them up. I'm very proud to be associated with them. And I'm the insignificant roaster in comparison to who they deal with now. I mean, if you look at the top 100 roasters in the world, 80 of them will be working with Caravella on the Colombian and South American coffees.
And of course, the benefit of that from the customer's perspective, and I'm saying this particularly for the guys who maybe haven't tried your coffees yet, is that you've had the same set of, 4 or 5 Colombians almost uninterrupted. I know there have been some brief interruptions, but for as many years as I've worked with you, and I imagine for even longer, right? And one of my personal favorites, and I know that many of Cape Coffee Bean's favorites, is that Los Idolos coffee that you talked about, which you still have, and I'm always amazed at how consistent the quality of it is over the years.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the advantages, and that's also basically led me to decide to try and do this crop to crop thing in other countries. It hasn't always worked. We've sort of got it right with Ethiopian coffees, but that we seem to have got a bump in the road this year. We got it right with the long mile coffees, then that whole thing fell to pieces. So my aim is to try and do as much as possible like that. We are working with Indonesian companies to try to do that. We've been struggling to get decent Indonesians that aren't spot coffees. So let me explain what a spot coffee is. A spot coffee is how almost everybody else in the industry works, where coffees that are in a warehouse or on their way to a warehouse are bought. Basically, you taste them, you order them, you get them. So they're almost like, not quite the same, but it's almost like calling Mr. D and ordering a takeaway, and then they give it to you. It's not quite as quick, but the point is you order from stuff that's already is there. It's not a bad model. It's just, to me, it's the book stop at the end of specialty coffee for me, which I'm going to take a lot of flack from saying that, but because a lot of people don't see it like that. But I feel that we should be working crop to crop, because there's a lot of reasons why. There are a lot of reasons it goes wrong. If you remember Arapuca, we worked with Arapuca. We were working with Falcon Specialty. We did it 3 years in a row. The second year we did it, the coffee was not as good as the year before. The third year, I just said to them, look, this coffee is just really, it's got to get better next year. Otherwise, I'm not taking it. Fourth year comes, the coffee's really bad. I just said to them, look, I feel like you're taking a chance here. This is not good coffee anymore. So we cancelled the forward contract, because which you can do if the quality is not up there. So I haven't always got it right. My aim is to get it right as much as possible. We really did a good job with the Ethiopians. Thanks to Jono from being there, or ex-Bespoke. He introduced us to some people when we went to Ethiopia, and we met the people we've been buying from anyway. We started realizing that a lot of the coffees we're buying on spot, we know exactly where they come from, even though 6 or 7 coffees are offering those coffees on spot. So I would rather work on a crop to crop basis. So that's actually how I approached Jono from Bespoke when he originally started doing stuff. I said, please, I want to look at doing the Ethiopians and the Kenyans, and either Rwandan or Burundian on this cycle. And we sort of got it right. Unfortunately, Bespoke is no longer, but that was my aim. My aim was to try to do this crop to crop. It's fun to do spot coffees. I mean, you see, we changed our Asians we've done through spot coffees. We do our centrals, our spot coffees, which we actually normally do through, I've done a number of partners, but actually because of the way the Caravella's grown up into Central America, and also down into Ecuador and Bolivia and Peru, what we tend to do now is we order our crop coffees from Colombia, and then I leave space on the pallet to bring in extra coffees. And then whatever is available that's coming across to their warehouse on spot, we tend to get a pre-crop sample, and we can book it before. So it's not quite crop to crop. I'm not the South American and Central American coffees, besides Colombia, they are nice, but they aren't my passion project. I far prefer, if I'm going to start putting my finger in, if I'm going to start choosing coffees that are different, I'm going to try some. I would love to stick to Africa. Africa has some issues I have been working with. The last 5 years, we've been trying to really work with people to try and get the stuff out of Africa, and it really has not been easy. I've probably have spoken to, I don't know, I'm guessing now, but between 12, 15 different logistics companies to try and get something where we can do on a crop-to-crop basis. It hasn't really worked. But that's what my mission is. My mission is to do as much crop-to-crop. So the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe that we do, which is from the Kachera washing station, we've done 4 seasons of it. And the first season wasn't sourced through the same person, but it was the same washing station. So we stuck to the washing station, but we chosen a different partner. African coffees are way more complicated because you've got too many people in the middle. But that's what we tried to do. We tried to say we really like that particular Yirgacheffe. We tried to do that with Limu. Our relationship with the people we were working with in Limu didn't work out so well. We even went and tasted coffees there. They had a phenomenal coffee from Limu from one single village, which I was really, really keen to get. Just couldn't get it right. And that's really a positive thing for me. And actually, I know some people don't believe going to origin changes you. And I talk about coffee tourism. For me, there were a lot of things that happened when I went to origin, where I started seeing that a lot of the stuff we are doing is the way to go forward. And you break through the PDF when you go to origin. You start seeing the truth. You start seeing, wait a minute, these 5 people who are supplying this coffee are actually all using the same agent. That's the sort of stuff you see. So it's the stuff I saw in Brazil, the stuff I saw in Colombia, which confirmed what's Carrera and Ethiopia. Those were, they really made me want to work on crop to crop, which is what I'd ideally like to do. And then have a couple of copies which we rotate the spot.
And I know that our customers, yeah, and I was going to say that I know that our customers, certainly benefit from that. And I do think that you speak to a particular requirement, as you described, where we love tasting all these different seasonal coffees. But as you say, there are people in the market that want to find a great specialty coffee and know that they can get it all year round. And I think you're right. You're one of the few roasters in Cape Town, certainly among the ones that we work with, that can provide that all year round. And I certainly love going back to my Los Idolos regularly. So I know that a lot of our customers appreciate that too. Let me switch gears a little bit now, Warren. I think that all of that is really interesting context. I wonder if you can tell us just briefly about what does your organization look like now? Who are the people that you work with? What does the company look like today?
So because we don't have a cafe, our business is all really about roasting. We have 2 roasteries. The main one is in Buitenverwachten. In Buitenverwachten, Umsikizi is the master roaster. Sometimes assisted by me, normally when he's on leave. But he is, and we're going to talk about roasting later, but he is the master roaster at Buitenverwachten. He decides what the coffee tastes like. This was a process that was difficult for me to learn, but he is the man behind the machine. So when you're drinking Los Idolos or Yirgacheffe or Limu, he's decided that is the way he wants the coffee to taste. Even though I am technically the QC, I only have a veto vote. I don't have 5, which is only if I think things are really bad. But he is the main man there. Then we have Sibu, who is our driver, but he's also our technical guy. So he does all the bean to cups, and all of them are very well trained in brewing. So they can help with anybody with brewing. Sibu is sort of training how to roast as well. We would love to have him roasting more. So he does a bit of roasting assistance at both the Vineyard Hotel and at Gailton. Normally it's with me because Umsikizi is very focused on his roasting and doesn't want people to tell him how to roast. So he'll have a discussion after the roast, but he doesn't want people interfering with him when he's roasting. So, which I think is great. And then we've got Maya, who works 3 days a week. At the moment, she's working remotely with what's going on with the corona. And she comes in Monday, Wednesday, Friday for just over a half day, where she does the admin. The idea was to let me free up to do our backends, because we have a lot of technical backends at the back. So we have our own profile management system, which we wrote. It's actually based on my old home roasting system. And we have our own order management system, because I haven't really found anything that does a good enough job for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the curse of being an IT person.
Sure.
So that's just.
And at the vineyard?
So the vineyard is only Sinu, with a little bit of help with Cebu. So Cebu will do his deliveries, and then he'll maybe go help. So Sinu is the roaster there, and Sinu has been phenomenal. He actually was our driver, also showing technical competence, and he all of us love tasting coffee. I'm being very fortunate in that way. Maybe it's osmosis that they learn to like it, but all of them start drinking coffee, and all of them drink black, and all of them love their coffee. So I think the basics is that everybody knows how to cup, everybody knows how to taste, and everybody, if they don't get to know the flavor wheel, I get upset. And in fact, if you look at our boxes where we tick the flavor wheel major categories, that is a team discussion. So we all taste the coffee, and we'll say that's what we're picking up. We don't try to be too specific. We try to use only the groups, because I also feel the customer must find his own notes. And I feel when you say there's, blueberry muffin in a coffee, it starts making people find it. If you say there's a fruit in the coffee, there could be so many different fruits. So it's part of the entertainment of brewing coffee for me. So you also got to learn. Give me a guide, but we're not telling you what to do. So that the team is very involved in that. I will say I feel like we've got a phenomenal team. The team hasn't changed. It's only got bigger. We've only had one staff member not stay with us. They left to start their own business, coffee shop, which then they didn't work. But otherwise, we've had no staff turnover. So Mzaki's been with us for, I think it's his 12th year this year. Sinu is with us for over 8 years. Sibu joined us just after Sinu moved, so he's about 3 years, and Maya's been with us for about 4 years, maybe 5. I might be wrong about that.
And
So
let me add to that to say that I definitely agree that your team are all, great coffee people, but also really lovely people to work with, and I fully agree that you've got a great little team there. Tell me, Warren,
the only
what do you
difficult
think
person to deal with is me. I can get quite ratty sometimes. Anyway.
And Warren, what do you think the future holds for your business? Where do you see Quaffee going?
So one of the things that we started dabbling with was doing better coffees, but I'm talking about the high-end competition coffees. I always hate this word best coffee because it means nothing. But we dabbled with that, and I haven't really got it right. I would definitely like to work harder on that. Maybe somehow figure out how to increase our volumes. These coffees are expensive. I understand that. But to me, that's the coffee industry that's fascinating. The auctions, the Cup of Excellences, those sort of coffees, which are very rare, are where I would like us to start doing more. I also would like to actually. I'm very happy with what we've done with our home brewers. We've got a lot more home brewers on our clients. I found the corporate market becoming a little bit overtraded, and it's not where before the solution was about coffee. Now it's just about basically putting stuff in a cup. So I don't see the corporate market being a big corporate market for me anymore. So on the one side, I would love to see more of our real special coffees. I call them the 87 plus coffees. So like we did the Yemen coffee, we did the auction coffee from Mexico. We did the 90 plus coffees. All those coffees. I find I would love us to always have some in stock without it going going flat first. So it's a difficult balance to get because the coffee sells slowly. That's if you ask me what my aim is. My aim is to try figure out how to do that. I haven't got it right yet. Maybe we're going to need more help from you because you seem to understand this market better. Um, I, and I also feel the company isn't static. We are forever changing. The way we design the roasting profile management system is for it to be iterative. So roasting can only get better. I always say to people, I always look back at how much I knew about roasting 6 months ago, how much I knew about coffee 6 months ago, and I go, wow, I really was an idiot. I didn't know much. And that's the aim. So we are forever learning and forever growing. And I don't imagine too much changing, except I would like to start getting. I mean, we've got a phenomenal following of home users, which they are the jewel in my crown as far as I'm concerned. And you've done a phenomenal job in attracting some of them, and I even joke with you. We share a lot of clients because you are able to give them a lot more than we can. But that's really the vision I have. You and I have had this discussion about hardware, and I haven't really. To me, hardware is something I like, and I can't really understand what anybody else likes. So I can't imagine us getting heavily involved in hardware, besides maybe if we find one particular product that we really like we did with the AeroPress, which we then handed over to More Flavor, and that was all about the AeroPress competition. So the main reason why we handed over AeroPress was I didn't really want to run the AeroPress competition, and I felt that the AeroPress wasn't being done justice by me because I'm not a very good marketer. And I think Dave and Zane and More Flavor did a far better job with than I did. So that's the vision. The vision is to get more and more people drinking coffee at home. And I do believe that we're seeing that trend. You probably agree with me.
I do, yeah. I mean, certainly, I would say that the lockdown has also done a lot for home brewing, though I guess it'll be interesting to see if it sticks in the longer term. But yeah, Cape Coffee Beans definitely has benefited from the uptick in the interest in brewing at home. I think that there are more and more people, and if we look at the rest of the world where, the specialty coffee market is maybe a little bit more developed, I think that we can see that that really is the direction that things move in, right? I often use the analogy of foodies, right? There are foodies that go to restaurants, but real foodies also make great food at home. And I think it's the same thing with specialty coffees. I think to really get into coffee, you have to start making it for yourself at home. Speaking of which, I have one final question for you, Warren, just before we wrap up here. What coffees are you drinking at home these days during lockdown, and how are you making them?
It's funny when you saw this when I heard you ask this question, other people thought, oh yeah, this is not going to really work well for me. so I actually think I have a problem when it comes to these sort of things. I don't really have. I can't only have one coffee at home. I find it extremely difficult. I normally I have between 6 and 8 of our own coffees, and I will almost always have another roaster's coffee at home. I find I cannot. I think the best way to explain it is I'm not a teetotaler. I enjoy drinking, but I'm not a big drinker. So I see coffee a bit like what most people see single malt whiskey or wine. I could not only have one coffee at home, and that extends to the brewing. So I also can't have one type of way of brewing coffee. If I sometimes think I should take a picture of my coffee station, because when we bought a house and we rebuilt it, I actually made an area just for my coffee. And in that, I actually have two totally different grinders. That one is designed for Turkish espresso type brews, and the other one is designed for basically everything else. If you want to know, it's the Baratza Vario, which unfortunately is no longer available in South Africa, and the Baratza Seta. You and I have had a long discussion about Seta, but I think as an espresso grinder and a Turkish grinder, it's a really, really good grinder. I'm very happy with what I get out of it. But it cannot do pour over. I might be losing sales for you here, but I tried everything. I tried everything to get the thing to work. I really wanted it. It was sort of like the round pig I was trying to force into the square hole. Eventually I gave up. I thought I can't have this hassle.
I would agree with you. In fact, if you visit the product page on the Cape Coffee Beans website, you'll find that there's a warning there not to buy the Baratza Seta for pour over. But I agree with you that it is a great home espresso grinder.
Yeah, and even if you use they've got a pour over set. I got some results, but actually the big problem with the Seta for me on pour over is it's actually inconsistent. You wouldn't expect it to be, but you can sometimes get a phenomenal pour over going out of it, and then you make the same pour over, and it's like a totally different coffee. What the hell happened? That's what my frustration was. So 1 out of 10 brews being good is just not good enough. So I actually have those two grinders. I have my Rancilio, which I got rid of my Brasilia espresso machine. I was never really happy with it. So I have the Rancilio with the PID controller in. I love that machine. I think it's probably the cheapest machine for what it does. It's just, to me, it's a Ferrari in sheep clothing. There are some limitations, and those limitations don't apply to me. Don't expect it to froth milk and make espresso with you at the same time. It's not going to happen. So that doesn't bother me because I don't do milk. Although it's beginning to bother my teenage daughter, who's now nagging me to do cappuccinos for her all the time. But I've taught her to do the milk herself, and she's just had to live with the fact that it's a 2-minute delay between milk and espresso. People are going to say rubbish. It can be quicker than that, but it's 2 minutes. It's what it is. So espresso. Considering where I came from, I don't drink a lot of espresso anymore. I do drink it. I go through these stages where I will only drink espresso. And I also go through stages where I only want espresso at a particular time. So this morning, for example, my wife and I went for a walk, and I was like dying for an espresso after the walk. So then I turned the espresso machine on. Eventually, it heats up pretty quickly, and my grinder's pre-dialed in. And I've got the Seta that weighs the head, which initially I thought was a gimmick, but now I think is one of the best features of the grinder, because it means once you know how much is weighed into your water filter, it's very easy to do the rest of the espresso. You put your scale on, you know roughly your ratio, so it's very quick. Making espressos is actually pain-free for me. And so then I'll have an espresso, and then I'll feel like a pour over, and then that becomes a big discussion for me because I have Chemex, a December dripper, I have a Kalita, I have a Yama, I have a Yarrow, I can't even pronounce it. I have a Horo, and actually I don't know why, but I'll particularly choose one or the other depending on the coffee. I find I can't really explain it to anybody because this is where I found language doesn't work for me. I'll just know. I feel like a horror today. It just makes a slightly different coffee to the Kalita or the December dripper. There are some notable exceptions that aren't in that list. I also have a Turkish brewer, which I often use at night. I love Turkish coffee brewed Turkish coffee. It's just, to me, it's the way to finish a meal. It's delicious. And I also have the Technoborn, which I brought home, a Technoborn, which you do into the thermos. I heard you and Dave having a discussion. I don't like brewing into glass, except when it's pour over. But I found these filter machines with glass. I don't like the coffee it makes. So that's the big problem. I have and I also have a Bricker mocha pot and a mocha master, which not a mocha master, a mocha express, which sometimes I'll just get a buzz. I just want to brew in it. So this is the big problem with that question for me is I don't really have a one size fits all. I will probably say the only thing I will say is there are coffees that I won't bring home, but even then that is very limited. I'm talking about a lot of the commercial coffees, but I, I on a day I can drink. Since the change in my diet, I haven't got a coffee addiction as badly as I did. I can sometimes have one coffee a day, and I can sometimes have 20 coffees a day. And what I feel like, it's normally driven by mood and what I feel like. So, but normally at least one coffee from another roaster is in my kitchen, if not more. My kids actually got so irritated with me and my coffee that they bought a special shelf for me to put my coffee bags in so that I can page through them like books because they were getting dad putting coffee bags all over the kitchen. Stop doing that. So I actually have a special container where it's almost like I file my coffees in it, and that sits next to my coffee machines.
That sounds like a great idea. We might need one of those at Cape Coffee Beans headquarters. I might need one at home as well, actually, come to think of it. But thank you for that insight. Warren, it's been a great discussion. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
But we didn't cover roasting, but it's fine. It's been a long chat. I think we're going to bore everybody to tears after this.
Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 where we can talk about roasting in more detail. But thank you very much for your time, Warren. I really appreciate it. I think it's been a good conversation. I think you've shared a lot of interesting stories with us and a lot of insights into how you do what you do. So I'd encourage everybody to check out Quaffee. And Warren, thank you again for your time, and all the best for the rest of the lockdown.
Thanks, and thank you too, Phelan. You've as much as I spoke about Zane in the beginning, I think you need to hold your hand up high and talk about what you've done for specialty in South Africa. Okay, mainly it's Cape Town focused, but you've put it on the map. You've given it your ability to put e-commerce in a way that is accessible to everybody is phenomenal. And in some ways, I'm a bit jealous because it's something that I should have been good at. But you've done a really good job, and I think that you are the platform. I often recommend people go to you, even when people are looking for particular coffees. I know I can't help them. I tell them go to Cape Coffee. It's a phenomenal product. I've seen so many people try to do what you did and fail, and you've done an absolutely brilliant job. It's actually a privilege to have you in the coffee industry in South Africa.
Oh, I appreciate that, Warren. Thank you. I can't say that it's all my work at this point. I've got a really great team behind me as well. But yeah, it's a real privilege to be able to do our little part in the space. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure.
Well, that brings us to the end of episode 4 of the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. I hope you enjoyed that. I think you definitely will have gotten a good insight into Warren's way of thinking about coffee and how Quaffee wound up in the coffee industry. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that I am conscious that Quaffee is probably one of the lesser known brands that we work with, but that has nothing to do with the quality of their coffee. Quaffee's offerings are sensational. I drink them very often myself. And I really would recommend anybody who loves specialty coffee to get to know what they do. I think I mentioned it during the course of the episode, but let me reiterate, one of the amazing things about Quaffee, despite being relatively small, is that they also have an unrivaled selection of coffees. And you really should do yourself a favor and try some of Warren's Colombians. It's one of the places that he invests most heavily. Certainly not their only delicious coffees, but if you're going to pick anywhere to start, I would definitely recommend trying out the Colombians. They are available at Cape Coffee Beans. At the time of this recording, during lockdown, admittedly Quaffee is not roasting their full selection, but I have a feeling that they will be back to it relatively soon as restrictions are starting to be lifted. Regardless, some of their Colombians are definitely available. In fact, my personal favorite. So I would recommend that you go and check it out. And as always, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you at the next episode.